Bob Erickson.
Hi, William.
How are you?
Good.
We are on auto recording here, so we've technically already started. So I just wanted
Started early. Okay. Here comes Keith.
Here comes Keith. Excellent. Oh, this is great.
It's a party now.
It is a party now. I was just thinking, it really is like cocktail hour. Like, I don't know who's going to show up. I'm pouring myself a drink and,
I can get a gin and tonic very easily just over there. It is Friday.
I know. Move this to 3. We could change the tone entirely, and then we really have some opinions about teaching. So in my classes, I'm perceiving this is a rough week for the students. It seems like they're in the thick of it. Is that what you folks are perceiving?
So far, I think my class is doing pretty well this week. I do think that Thursday was a little rough just because they sort of had a day off, and nothing really bad, but they said it was really hard to get back into the swing of things on Thursday.
Interesting. I didn't even really clock that. I didn't take Thursday off, and I didn't take Wednesday off, and then Thursday, I just rolled along. I didn't even really realize the day of rest.
Yeah, I think I had my first meeting at 8, and I supported our engineering sampler day for our admitted students. So I didn't get off Zoom until 7:15 at night.
Ooh, that's tough.
So
that's tough. That's a long day. My Thursdays are long like that. Though I do get a break. I make a break for lunch. Oh, this is great. This is wonderful. Karen, nice to see you.
Thanks. This is my first one this semester. Happy to be here.
I'm so glad you came. My name's William. Keith, Bob, and Jason, you were here last time, weren't you? Yeah, it's great to see you again.
Hi,
Karen,
William.
What unit are you in?
Yeah, it's like who you're talking to.
Either one. I was asking Karen specifically. Go ahead, Karen.
I work in the dean's office. I only teach one class. I do a transfer success seminar. It's a special topics course. So it's like an orientation-based class for engineering transfer students. But in my regular job, I support our university partnerships in Gunnison and Grand Junction.
Oh, wow. That's great.
So just here to glean all the teaching knowledge you have to offer.
Great. And Jason, remind me what unit you're in.
Yeah, I'm in CTL, but I'll just remind you also that I was formerly an English professor down in Texas. Yeah.
Amy, great to see you. Thank you for coming.
Hi, William. It's nice to see you.
It is high noon, so technically we're beginning. A couple more people are still dropping in. The setup of this Zoom call records automatically, so I'm just telling everybody that it's recording and, you're on camera. You're on candid camera. This is wonderful. Donna, great to see you. Oh, Tina, great. Jay, wonderful. Good. We're developing, this is only our second meeting, and we're developing some community, which is wonderful. Karen, welcome to the community. Glad you came. I want to wait a few more minutes before we go, and I have a kind of opening thought that I wanted to think through, and then we'll just go. So let's see if we have 1 or 2 other people. Does anyone have anything great planned for this weekend? Nothing? I'm taking the dog to the vet. The dog, we have this little terrier, and he's very high strung. In fact, we adopted him from someone who was moving away, and that person gave us his Prozac medication with the dog. So now the dog unfortunately feels that he cannot walk on wood. He can only walk on carpet. He can walk on wood, it's fine, but he feels like at this point in his life, he can no longer cross wood. So that's slowing him up in our house. As you can see, my floor now, the dog cannot enter the room. So we're gonna go to the vet and see if we can have a little chat about walking.
So William, did you make a wood floor before or after you knew that with your dog?
Took the carpet away. No, we've actually been laying down more rug. He can make his way around the house. Poor guy.
Well, William, I changed my background for future, building up teamwork, maybe at 5 o'clock.
We were joking earlier on this call that if we move this to 3:30, maybe the drinks can be a little stronger than my cup of coffee here. All right, we have a critical mass. It's great to see people. Let me start us off. Welcome to College Conversations about Pedagogy. This is twice monthly Zoom call, and it was in response to the Winter Symposium where people asked, rightfully so, for just a chance to talk about teaching. So my name, you all know, is William Kuskin. We record these. That's why I'm introducing myself again. My goal here today, I have a thought that I want to think out. And ultimately, though, this is a very loose structure for sharing thoughts, for venting, for thinking things through out loud. So here's my thought. I titled this one, Constraints. Does remote actually help? And by giving it that title, I meant to kind of, pull the tiger's tail a little bit. And it seems to me, here's what I want to get to. All teaching, and I'm stealing this from a colleague, Chris Haynes, who works in the Office of Academic Innovation, has done a lot of work on the MSEE and on MOOCs. But Chris's central thought is that all teaching has constraints, and we all know this. Every time you walk into a classroom, you're faced with constraints. The way the chairs are structured, the scheduling, the time of day that the scheduling has demanded, the shape of the room, even the fall of sunlight in the room. All these things shape how we teach. Monday, Wednesday, Friday rotation, Tuesday, Thursday. But these constraints, for many of us, have become somewhat invisible, right? You take it as the natural order, the water we swim in, that there will be Monday, Wednesday, Friday rotation, or that the sun will move across the sky and will fall on the class differently. So we've normalized and internalized certain constraints. What the pandemic has made it clear to every single teacher in the world is that online has a different set of constraints. So in the spirit of opening things up, and really, we don't have to follow out this line of thinking, I wanted to think at some point in our conversation about the way we're dealing with the constraints of remote learning, good, bad. But then I also wanted us to think about what truly is liberating about remote learning. What do we find ourselves unshackled by and able to do differently? So there, I've said my thought. Constraints about remote learning. Does it actually help? Does it hurt? Does it allow things? Is it simply a greater shackling? That's my thought. Now I'm going to respectfully stifle myself and let.
So William, I have one, but it's sort of a constraint on the opposite direction. Say, for example, if we have a lecture class that is doing really well remote, especially if maybe it's a large class, so remote. Once we go back onto campus full time to support our international students, we cannot have that remote section. We cannot have a class that's purely remote anymore, unless we have a section that is on campus to support the sponsors of our international students, which I think is a shame because I think some large classes could actually do better in the remote format. Like I can't imagine math in 450 person auditorium is better than 450 people on Zoom. But unless there's some way of a structure to make sure you have in person for international students, you cannot have a class fully remote anymore once we go back on campus. I just learned that today, so which is a shame because I think some classes might actually run better remote, but we might not be able to support that moving forward.
Can you speak to what is making them run well, these big classes remote? Like, what do you think are the pieces that are working?
I think, faculty who've actually really embraced the idea of remote education, and Bob Erickson has done a lot of work with Coursera on developing small, specific videos to watch before a lecture or after a lecture. Really makes a big difference. I've taken a lot of those ideas into mine. I probably have about 80 or 90 videos now in my class that my students have as support. And my class is running so much smoother now than when it was in person. I'm actually thinking in fall of actually making my assignments more difficult because the students are progressing a lot faster now, and it's really exciting. They're doing, I look at all the projects, I look at the code, they're just doing a lot better. And I think in some respects, I'm disappointed that I might have to go in person, or actually I should say I got to figure out how to make it a hybrid, right? Still use these videos, but add them in an in-person format.
Sorry, can I ask another question? I'm really interested in this. So do you think they're more amenable to like a flipped structure? Like, are they watching things ahead of time the way they wouldn't have before?
Well, I think what you decide is flip. From the feedback I'm getting for students, if you ask them to watch a 45-minute lecture before lecture, they don't like that because that really means lecture is 2 hours, right? But if you have a few small specific learning points that you want them to really at least be introduced beforehand, which are like maybe 2 5-minute videos or maybe 2 10-minute videos, they're very amenable to that. I force that because that's their participation grade through Canvas and Play Posit. They have to watch it. And there's just one simple question at the end, basically to make sure that they watch it. I make it sure that they can't fast forward through it. They seem to be very amenable to that, and it's really helping my class because they're coming into class with a certain knowledge, and then I can start from that point. But a standard flipped classroom, the idea of a full lecture beforehand and then just making a pure discussion afterwards, the feedback that I've been hearing from students is not very positive of that.
But so maybe, do you think they're moving through material faster because they can kind of do it more at their own pace, or what do you think is contributing to them getting through things better?
Well, I think a lot of it is, so I have like these what I call pre-lab videos, but then I also have what I call, I've made office hours asynchronous. I don't have to be at office hours anymore. I have probably about 40 other videos, or maybe 30 plus videos that are like video FAQs. So the students get stuck on a problem, they can go back and go through this and go, my general problem is here, and then here's my list of videos. And they go, oh, now I understand this issue. Now I know how to go solve the problem and solve it. But also the short videos, even the pre-lab videos, since it's really succinct, if they have an issue, they can go back and say, I want to watch that 1 5-minute video or that 1 7-minute video. Instead of, okay, I'm going to pull up a 45-minute video, and now I'm got to figure out where it was in the 45-minute video, watch that. And since campus doesn't pay for our videos to be automatically, this is, I think, an issue at the campus, is we don't pay for our videos to be ADA compliant unless a student in our class requires it. I think that's that is a big issue. We should be proactively making our videos ADA compliant.
Yeah, I agree. Well, you stole mine, because that was what I was going to say, is that in my teaching, I started making those short videos. And it was huge. Like maybe if they took a quiz and I saw a bunch of students had a similar misunderstanding, I could create this little video and ask them to watch it. And I never would have done that before. So I totally agree that that was a huge benefit to remote. I just was curious about, I picture an in-person lecture where there's 400 people. One of the huge benefits is being able to turn to your neighbor, which they just can't do anymore, to ask a question or to work with somebody, or, that relationship piece is gone. So that's interesting to me, what you think is the benefit there of having those big classes online.
I was going to say, I went to school a long time back in the early 80s, but I don't really, most of my friends in the big classrooms who are to the right or to the left of me came to class with me. You know, it's not like, I don't think I forged any new relationship because I sat next to someone in a 450 person class. I already had those relationships. So I think really you need to figure out, we need to figure out how to develop those relationships outside of class. But that's my own experience back in the 80s.
So Keith, there's actually a lot of work in physics education on just-in-time teaching, which is a lot of what you're just talking about. And there's a lot of open resources as well of ways to do it effectively. There's a lot of reading on that. Did a lot of reading that when I was teaching physics. So, I mean, you have the videos now, and so there's a lot of ways you can do it already, even in the classroom, which is kind of nice. Of course, then you bring them back into the classroom. I actually find, Becca, that the opposite was true in online teaching, which is that the facilitating the group work is so much easier. The breakout rooms, you're not always only talking to the person who's sitting next to you. You can change who people are talking to. And the breakout room has a safe space. Like this is now I can talk in a way where I'm not worried about what my neighbor's thinking. Like nobody's looking at me while I'm in a breakout room. I can ask a stupid question. I guess you can chit chat too, and you can actually not do what you want to do. But I found it to be really productive. And while I wasn't in the breakout rooms, I heard them when they came out of them, and they were way more productive than they had been in the classroom, which I thought was awesome. And they could do things like I could practice talks. We did practicing scientific talks. I couldn't do that in a classroom because they'd all be talking over each other.
And Amy, I think another thing that's liberating to my students, as you said, in breakout rooms, is the chat. Because some people are just too nervous to stand up in class in person to talk, but there's this idea of chat, even though it says who sent it, they feel much more safer. And so I think more people, I noticed this back in the spring when we switched from in-person to remote, I had a lot more people engaging in the chat room once I did that, because I think people felt safe.
I saw that too. I heard a lot more voices.
Yep.
Like that, I heard all the voices at some point in time. They were all jumping in.
But get back to your breakout room idea, Amy, is the way I break out my lab is I have breakout rooms in certain if you have issues on this part of the lab, here's a breakout room, right? And they can self-select. So I might have an issue in the lab, so I'm going to be in this breakout room, and I got a student assistant who is running that breakout room. Then they can hop to another one. And if you're in a 450 person class, you can't really do that. So if I'm in this big lecture hall and I want to have a breakout rooms to talk and have students break out into certain areas to discuss or to talk about certain problems they might be having, you can't do it because it physically cannot move, where virtually you can.
I think Jean Hertzberg told me too that she was doing office hours that way. She would have an office hours, but she would create breakout rooms based on a question that they were struggling with, and they could just go help each other during office hours, and she could move around, which I thought was pretty clever.
Yeah, I would just echo the classes that I teach in the Department of Psychology are pretty different from, I think, a lot of the classes that y'all are teaching. But I was just having this conversation with one of my classes yesterday about breakout rooms. And I have this one class and they're like on fire in the chat. It's just wild. But somehow there's just gotten to be this culture in this class of, asking questions, but also just bantering and having fun and getting to know each other. So I think that that's really kind of cut down on the sense of isolation that students have too. There's also this opportunity for people to work with, when I send them into a breakout room, I always have like a Google Doc and questions and, material for them to do. So it's pretty structured, but they work with different people throughout the semester. So they get to know some different folks. And I think that it's really built community better than just working with the people who are next to you all the time, which has been a nice kind of psychosocial benefit to this whole context that we're in too.
So this is great. I'm going to come back here. Keith, you started us out by saying that your course was running smoother. And I think what's wonderful about it is that everyone's concurring. So how do we measure smoothness? I guess breakout banter is one way of saying, hey, this is lively and I like it and it's what I want. How do we measure smoother versus just, I'm disconnected by my screen. I said what I wanted to say and they were silent, so I assume they got it. How do we measure, how do you as teachers, and I want to hear more voices here, measure a sense of smoothness or a sense of success? How do you measure that versus just saying, well, hey, hour's done and that was great. I said all my points.
Right now I don't know if I have quantitative data, but qualitative data is just, like I say, like reviewing the final projects. So I grade all the final projects myself. And I just noticed the level and I've been teaching this class now for 4 semesters, and the quality which is significantly above. And then the other thing that is maybe more quantitative is more students are getting this project, the assignments done on time and not handing them in late.
Yeah, I think the measure is not what I told the students. The measure is what the students did and what they demonstrated. So ultimately, could they do the homework or do the assignments, whatever it is? And you try to have checkpoints along the way, but it's the student engagement is the student's work.
A perennial complaint about online teaching is cheating. And remote is not asynchronous online. Sorry. How in this really celebratory discussion, how are you confronting cheating?
Students can cheat no matter what. I mean, I don't see the difference.
It's an interesting thing, just the idea of cheating, because most employers say they can tell a student whether they cheated during their interview. I guess the big question is, for the employer side, if the students are cheating in a class that's not their major or not their interest, then they might never show up at the interview. But if you're a computer engineer and you're cheating in a computer engineering class and you're going to try to get your job, the odds are it's going to be very difficult because you're not going to be able to answer the questions that actually occur. But we actually had this discussion at the Associate Chairs meeting in the College of Engineering this week or last week with Rhonda. And so at the college level, we've decided to look at two ideas. One idea is actually trying to shut down Chegg and Course Hero as much as possible, which means actually getting resources at the college level to formally request Chegg and Course Hero to take down the coursework associated with our university. But on the other side, we're looking at new ideas on how to administer tests other than proctorio, because students don't like that. Well, one of the most common ways of minimizing cheating that they found with the small group that we interviewed with is having a pool of questions to ask. And for example, like one of the professors from, I think, CS had 5 different questions, 5 different sort of questions for each topic. So say there was 5 questions, they actually had 25 questions. So each person randomly got one of those 5. And then you provided enough time so you couldn't really go and ask someone else to say, oh, did you have that type of question? I would have to say I have, I teach in my lab class some theory classes. And so I have built up a question, I think a question bank of roughly 500 questions. And they have 60 minutes to answer 50 questions. And it's in Canvas and it's randomly selects the questions for them. So no one, I don't know what the odds are. I'm not very good in probability, but the odds of anyone getting the exact same in the same order is pretty low. But that was another, so at the college level, we're looking at trying to shut down, like I said, Chegg and Course Hero, and looking at ways of, talking to faculty about having more of question banks. There might still be handwritten questions, but somehow you randomly assign this student one of these four for question one and one of these four for question two.
All right, other thoughts about this remote learning experience. Jay, how are you doing? And
well, so my classes are a little bit different. I'm teaching senior projects, so project-based course, and then a architectural studio. So they're project-based, there's no cheating there. The studio one, we finally have some in person. But I guess what I struggle the most with is just the personal connection. Is putting your architectural designs out there is a very intimate thing where you are putting your creativity on the line, and it's really difficult to do that to a black box and have a good dialogue there. You're just missing out so much of that nonverbal communication. So that's something that I've struggled the most with in terms of connecting, and I guess the structure of remote learning, that's been difficult. I don't really know how to get around that, other than it takes a lot more time to develop that relationship with the students so that they feel comfortable putting their ideas out there. And I've basically sort of taken away grading within that. I've left it all formative. It's all just feedback, one-on-one feedback. So that way they feel comfortable putting it out there, because otherwise it just smothers their creativity, because they're engineers, they're not designers. They're trying to enter this a bit of a different field.
so talk to me, how big is the class, and how do you structure the formative feedback period?
So it's 30 students, but we have 2 3-hour blocks of time in addition to 1 lecture a week. So I've structured it that way, in that I have plenty of time to answer all the questions and meet with every single student, every single class period about their project. So this doesn't fit. So this is studio style teaching. And so it's just a little bit different with that, but I found it to work well.
So put that together a little more for me. What's not working? You opened with saying that this has been this has been tough, right? That you've struggled with it, and I guess, what do you think? Is it simply the lack of being in the same room? How have you accommodated that? And keep going with it.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm getting at is I've students from very different ends. There's some students who are asking to meet with me all the time, and I really understand where they're at with their learning and their grasp of the ideas. I have other students who are working individually. They're not wanting to interact with classmates. I can force them to interact with classmates, but you can't, because they're just going to sit in the break room with their videos off. And so I have no idea what they're learning. I get them to turn something in, but I want them to explain it. And I've been really struggling with a small subset there of just how do I engage an international student who has their camera off because it's midnight for them and they aren't interested in this subject and they're wanting to learn. Like, a grade's not going to hold that over their head in terms of getting them to learn. And that's one that I've really struggled with. But so it's just this huge dichotomy, whereas in person, well, there's the social pressure. Everyone is doing work. They see other people's designs. They know when they're behind or where they're at. They can sort of benchmark themselves. I've tried to create that through virtual whiteboards and trying to create, this more collaborative environment. But that's, I guess, within the feedback and understanding where my students are at. That's what I struggle with.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, it's not easy, I think, to actually reveal what's a struggle in a class. So thank you for that. So look, I'm looking around, there's great people on this call to talk about that. So go ahead. Thoughts? What are people thinking? Jay's really identified the ability to check out of a community in remote is a problem in a way that it is fundamentally different than in a regular class. So thoughts?
Yeah, I fully agree with Jay on that. I mean, there are some students that actually need that physical space to be in person to really participate in the class. And you got the top students; they're going to be probably successful no matter what, in person or remote. And then you got the middle tier, which is probably the biggest tier, that does somewhat can handle both or learn how to handle both. But there's that one tier that really needs in person, and those are the hardest ones to reach out to. And I don't think I really have an answer. I don't know how to pull them in because they want, almost like you said, Jay, check out, right?
So everyone had an exam today in class yesterday. Everyone was stressed out about the exam. Third of the class emailed me saying, can we skip class to go to the study session? Like, no, you need to be here doing this during this time. So I'll make sure that the study session gets recorded for you later. But yeah, they're just black boxes. And what is my role as the instructor here? I want everyone to learn, but I can't bring a student that's a black box that is not attending every Zoom time, who's not actively working. How do I bring them in? How do I engage them? That's just, I struggle with that.
You're taking me back to what I was thinking about with the 400 people sitting in a lecture and sitting next to somebody else. I don't think it's necessarily about friendships or study groups. And maybe Tina can help me here. I think there's a psychological difference between casual communication and structured communication. So what we're losing completely on remote is any sort of casual, hey, how are you? Students sit down at a table, say hello. They can maybe make time for that in the breakout room, but generally most of us send up to breakout rooms with like a really specific goal. And so unless we've told them to do that, they don't necessarily do that. And so then what's the incentive to turn my box on? Because I have to say, sometimes I think about that black box as somebody who's unmotivated. So there could be, I don't want to be here or I'm lazy, but I tend to think about them as unmotivated because then I can think about, are there ways to motivate them, right? Are there ways to get them to be engaged here instead of engaged in whatever else they're doing that I can't see? Because when I can see them, maybe I can nudge them with eye contact, right? Or all those little casual communications that I can't do anymore. So I think the conversation has to be about like, what motivates them so that they actually want to turn their screen. And it might be that at the beginning of class, they know there's going to be some sort of icebreaker or activity that's not class related, that's fun, or I'm going to send them into a quick little pair share with somebody to tell them about something about their life that's not about the content, because that's the piece that I think they're not getting. But I hear you, Jay, talking a lot about relationship building in person, right? All those little things that add in. And I think it's much harder now. Yeah.
So what's fascinating about that is something that the subset that came in person this week, they were so quiet in person. I had to force them to interact with one another. It was like they had difficulty adjusting back because they're so used to treating everyone as this black box. They didn't know how to interact socially in the classroom. And that was just super surprising to me. I had to lead them through like an introduction of one another because they're just not used to it anymore.
Yeah, like re-socializing almost, right? Yeah.
There was a talk last night by Esther Perel. I don't know if anybody
saw that. Yeah.
He was talking about that phenomenon of like, the idea that we're going to have to sort of re-socialize ourselves after this because nobody's going to know how to behave in person. I don't know, Jay. I mean, I think that these kinds of kind of stuck points happen for lots of people across campus. They certainly happen in my department. I hear lots of my colleagues talking about, this issue of students being kind of checked out. I don't know if it's always motivation. I think some students are anxious about interacting in this environment. So I think that's a part of it. I think for some students, I think some students feel, they already have stuff going on outside of class that has nothing to do with your teaching or what you're presenting, that is just burdensome. And they bring that into class, and it's hard for them to, just engage. I think there's all kinds of ways in which cognitively students are kind of sliding around in an unfocused way. Often that's pretty different experience for them of the way that they were able to bring themselves to being students before the pandemic. So I just think that there's a lot of variables that may be going into this, but I don't have all the answers. I'll tell you that to the extent that things are working in my class, it's because I guess because of a few things, although I'm just saying this with a ton of humility, and I may be completely wrong, right? But I think that it's working because there are, like as Becca was talking about, there are, these kind of opportunities to do some informal connections. I think that helps. I think I give them enough structure when I send them into breakout rooms that they're not completely paralyzed by anxiety about talking to each other. I also often, if we have time, I say, decide, among yourselves who's going to, kind of report back to the larger class. So they do have that kind of follow-up thing that they know is going to happen. But the other thing that I'm doing, and I've just done this once so far, but they get points for participating in these discussions and filling out the Google Docs and stuff like that. But every once in a while, and I've told them this from the beginning of the semester, I'm going to drop in a little survey and have them rate each other in terms of their participation and whether they were on it and whether they had done the reading and that kind of stuff. So I've only done it once, and all but one student got good good marks from most of the people in their group. So there's it's putting the screws on them a little bit, but I don't do it very often. They know that it's just intermittent, but it does, in terms of what the students are telling me, it does motivate them to be accountable. They know that when they go into those discussion groups, they're accountable to the rest of their group members for having done the reading and being prepared and like being there. So I don't know. So far, so good. There's just one idea. But I think that there's just a variety of reasons why it's hard for students to bring themselves to this artificial, wacky context.
Tina, my students seem to be very open because every Tuesday, the first 15 minutes in lab, I do the resilience work, what you've been developing. and the students seem to be very open to that. Yeah. And, I think I've actually got more students are interacting in the class now as I've been moving forward with that. So I don't know if there's something about, that work, going through that's making them feel more open, but it seems like more students are getting more or participating more vocally or asking questions as I've been doing this.
Yeah, oh gosh, thank you, Keith. I'll pay you later for that little bit of advocacy. But I run my classes with a lot of openness too about what's happening and how hard this is, and we've done, unsurprisingly, some of the resilience curriculum too. And so, there's a whole different, kind of spin on in sort of consistency with what I'm teaching too in the psychology department between, those sorts of messages and the content of the class almost every week. So yeah, but I'm glad that that's useful and maybe has helped to open things up a little bit.
And I'm planning to do it next semester as well.
Yay.
They can give me another $20 there.
Yeah, PayPal, good for you, Venmo, whatever. All right.
I want to hear from Jason, and then part of Jay's issue was a specific question about international. I'd love to hear from Andrew. So if I could put Jason up and Andrew on deck, that would be great.
I guess maybe I have some questions and some comments, and I'm wondering what the quality of work is from the students who don't share their screens. And it might be a wide range of sort of like non-committal to actually doing some interesting work. And I'm wondering if there's other ways for them to, it seems like if they are doing good work, there's other ways for them to sort of increase interaction if it's not on screen on the days that you would want. And I'm thinking, is there a way to sort of create an offline community where people, you know, like either write a journal about what the projects that they're working on, and then also share that journal with someone else who's, you know, grouping together people that don't share their video screen, grouping them together so that they do it offline and have some sort of interaction that way. One of the things when we first started talking about remote learning and the possibilities for it, I've taught online quite a bit, and one thing that I think it's really good for is people who are autodidacts. And so I'm wondering if, like, again, if they're not sharing their screen but they're doing good work, do you have a few students who are just actually really self-motivated and maybe go through the resources and then produce work, but they don't really sort of engage in that sort of interactive way?
Yeah, so it's about half and half. So half of them that are cameras off, super solo, never want help, never do stuff, they are doing great work. It's the other half that, you know, it's about 4 or 5 that they're lost, or I'm lost at how they're doing, and it's both sides.
If that's the case, then maybe, and I'll just throw this out as an idea, and hopefully it's helpful, but if you could pair up some of those, you know, high achieving students with some that sort of aren't doing as well in the class, and sort of if there might be common traits, if they're, you know, these two, what they have in common is not turning on their screens. And so if you can get them to sort of interact, there might be ways that it'd be mutually beneficial.
I like that.
Andrew, let me lean on you. How do you see the international student experience? Do you have a sense of what separates out those students and how they're doing and how they're grappling with this?
Yeah, most of the information I have is fairly anecdotal from the advisory board that I assembled this academic year. It seems to me that those who have already been part of our campus community for a while are managing about as well as, you know, our domestic students that were already part of our community. You know, they at least have connections, they have friends, they know some of their professors, they know, you know, if they're grad students, they know their PIs, they have those relationships, and so they're able to work within that like the rest of us are having to do. It's been tough for new students. You know, in the fall, we had essentially no new incoming first-year students, for example, and I don't believe that many first-time graduate students, unless they were already in the United States, they typically had to defer to this semester. As far as the policy that Keith cited, I believe I'm correct on this, but please don't take this as gospel. But I think that the regulations that have changed in, you know, given the pandemic, are that continuing international students can take a fully online course load with us, whether they're in the United States or at their home countries, whereas first-time students, in order to maintain their status and come to the US at all, do have to have at least one or more hybrid type course, or a course with an in-person component. So that's created some issues. I know that some other issues that I've heard from international students is, you know, especially at the graduate level, there was a case I was working on in computer science where there's a lot of extra paperwork that goes into having, you know, being able to maintain an international student, say on a graduate assistantship or research assistantship that is not living in the United States. And so there was then this perception that international students were not given this option to maintain their assistantships and live abroad, whereas their domestic counterparts could, say, stay with their family in California and still maintain these positions, or whatever that case may be. And that turned out, because it's a paperwork issue, it takes about 3 times as long to get that set up for international folks. And so that's been a big challenge for sure. In general, that this population has been really in the push and pull of, changing federal regulations, borders closing, commercial flights not being available, all of that good stuff. So it's been hard for them.
Yeah. I've witnessed that in my own classes with students last semester returning mid-semester to China, and then faced with a tremendous time difference, and how do they participate? I was thinking, Jay, and I want to thank you for kind of broaching this, because on the one hand, we're talking about how large lecture, the remote actually personalizes and individualizes really well. But then on the smaller class, the 30 and below, it sets up new impersonal barriers. So, in my own class, I just want to throw in what I've been doing. I've actually shifted to a lot of craft work, like you, workshop work. You weren't shifting, I'm shifting, so that I'll ultimately spend 20 minutes of every class now on 2 activities at the beginning. And one activity is a kind of general reflection on how we're doing. And sometimes I start it with some story about my dog's anxiety as a way of opening up a conversation more generally about anxiety, right? And that all happens before the class, before I start recording. And then I turn to the workshop section. Sometimes that conversation leads into an open discussion of breaking the fourth wall and talking about what's holding us back. I haven't been able to do that with my dog, but with my students, I'm able to do that. And I get a lot of traction there, and I build trust. When we move to the workshop, I heap praise on everybody. I mean, it can be a jagged line across a blank page, and oh, you did that very powerfully. In order to continue that sense of trust and engagement, another thing I've started doing is writing my students pretty continually. And that takes time, but I built in a student journal where they have to write me, and I promise to write them back within 12 hours. So each month they have to write me. And, last class I had 50 students, and it was a lot of time, but I developed relationships with them. Now, when students disappear on me, even if it's just turning their camera off, I write them. And I write them and just say, hey, it's Kuskin, checking in on you. You doing okay? And 9 times out of 10, they write me back. It's the ones that don't write me back that I have to try and push towards some check-in with their advisors, and often that doesn't go anywhere. Hey, Becca, I see you're gonna run. Often that doesn't go anywhere, but I had a student yesterday who was checking out of the course. He wasn't showing up. And yesterday, after a couple email exchanges, he came back and he spoke and he engaged and he kept his video on. I saw that as, maybe a momentary success, but a success nevertheless, because in the large lecture, yes, it does work. We can use the affordances of technology to make it into a smaller discussion, breakout rooms, short snippets. But in the middle size and small class, the format becomes impersonal and challenging and alienating. And I think the teacher has to figure out ways of softening it up by building trust on an interpersonal level. And I can't see a way around that taking time. And it's very fair to say for a teacher to say, well, whoa, I don't have time. On the other hand, I do think it works. I think that I had a student who I'm still in touch with actually last semester. Middle of the semester, he has to go back to China, and it was tough for him. And frankly, he was having a lot of trouble with the notion of a kind of analytical thesis-driven essay too. And all I can say is we're still exchanging emails, 9, 10 weeks later, because we kind of developed a relationship. He's out there in China thinking about comic books, and it's neat. It's neat for me. It's neat for him. Yeah. Sometimes I don't want to write an email, but it's good. So that's my thought.
I've been doing that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Andrew.
Your mute's on, Andrew. Your mute's on.
Thank you. I appreciate this discussion a lot. I'm happy to talk about international students and those issues, as it's very much wrapped up in my work. My motivation for attending today is I taught a section of Cohen 1830 for first-year students last semester. And I started out in person. We were meeting at the Millennium Hotel in this huge ballroom with, I had 18 students in my section. And after we all had to go remote, and I think it was September after the outbreak, I kept my class virtual because one of the things I found was in that in-person environment, as much as that's what I really was craving and wanting, when everybody is that far apart from each other and wearing a mask, I couldn't even memorize their faces and names. I couldn't figure out who the heck they were. And a lot of that class is really interactive with breakout conversations and groups and so forth, and telling somebody to, talk about some maybe deep issues or things around like identity formation and all of this stuff, that these are heavy topics, and to say, turn to your neighbor, keep your mask on, and talk 10 feet away from each other about this stuff, it didn't seem very effective. Whereas Zoom at least allows for, breakout rooms, allows me to see their whole faces with their name under it so I could get to know them. And so I'm thinking about all of this as I prepare to lecture again in the School of Ed this June, and I've already been told to expect that to be online. And so trying to be proactive so I can think about how I can maximize engagement with my students, because it's really tough. So hearing from all of you who have been living this and are faculty, whereas I dabble in lecturing and primarily an administrator, it's really helpful to me, and I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you, Andrew.
One thing I want to note on the international students is I think as faculty, we say international students, we're just referring to a large group of students. Yet each of their experiences are very unique. And even just my Kuwaiti students, they are so varied in where they're at, where their background is, if they're in the country, if they're in Boulder, if they're somewhere else. And so I found that to be very eye-opening of just, it's not just international students, it's so-and-so, and having their name, each of their lived experiences through COVID and through this semester are quite varied and quite different. And I tried to, put them into clumps in order to get in my classroom to support them. But that's been, it's taken 6 weeks to figure that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, just so impressed. I've got a couple of international students now who are actually, one is in Kuwait too, but I've just been, it's just a tremendous effort to try to do this and to wake up at 1 a.m. to attend class and do a presentation. So, I've just been really, part of this gets back to what William was talking about before. I probably don't send emails to all my students, but I do email with a lot of my students around different things and different pressures they're under, or requests or struggles, or clarification or whatever. And I think that one of the things that I really have paid attention to much more since COVID is just being a little bit warmer and a little bit more, reassuring, and then following up, how did that thing go, that you had to miss class for. So just a little bit more human, right, and connected than not that I'm inhuman a lot of times, but I think I've just put a little bit more effort into, those relationships, and making sure that students know that they can tell me what's going on really, and then I'm going to respond in a warm, non-punitive way.
In terms of the international, when I was vice provost, I spent a lot of time in Kuwait and UAE and trip to Saudi. And I think that our university has made such a powerful difference in people's lives. It's much in the news right now how the LASP built EMM satellite is now sending back pictures of Mars. And I think that is a global event, but from speaking with my contacts in the UAE, I realized that this is a national event in the UAE of incredible proportions. I mean, one person wrote me and said that it's comparable to the founding of the nation itself. So the fact of the matter is, maybe 30 students, graduate students, moved from the UAE to here and moved through our program in various ways. And we're making a tremendous difference. And sometimes that gets lost. So the emails, I think it all really adds up, even when it feels like it doesn't. I think that there's just tremendous work being done by this university on an international scale. And given the obstacles really since 2016, we should take great pride in what we've accomplished. So we only have a few more minutes, and I want to thank you all. I enjoy these conversations. What elephant in the room am I not seeing that needs discussion? What, when you said, yeah, I'll drop in on Kuskin's thing, what have we not talked about that you were hoping that we would? Tina?
You know, I guess I just I've said this to you before, William, but like one of the things on my bucket list was to never teach a remote class, and then this happened. And I think, you know, I think that just acknowledging that this is hard and it's challenging, and, you know, every class has its unique challenges, and that this is, you know, for most of us, something that we never wanted to do anyway. And that, that we can, I just hope we give ourselves a little bit of grace of just knowing that we're doing the best that we can do under pretty difficult circumstances. And that, you know, as we go forward, so now we're 3 semesters into this, and, you know, figuring out a lot more things every semester that work. And so I think, you know, there's just a role here for being patient with ourselves and with our students as we go through this, and also knowing that I don't think there's one answer or set of answers that's going to work for everyone. So just like, yeah, it's hard.
Well said. I was beating myself up about something this morning, and I think your point about being gracious with ourselves as well as our students is well taken. I mean, it's well made, and I take it to heart.
I guess I just have to say that while I don't wish COVID isolation on anyone or anything, I've always felt drawn to distance teaching because it allows people to access the university that wouldn't otherwise, you know. So it's it's an opportunity, and I think that I also take it as a learning new ways to teach that work, where distance technology is hard and low. It's at a lower level of development than what we always do on campus. And so how do you figure out how to pull it off? And so rather than saying it's no good, I'd rather just say, let's figure out how to make it work, and how you make it work is very different. And I'm trying to teach this lab where people build a solar power system, and they're now having to do it at home. And a year ago, I would say, forget it, you can't do it. But, well, it's either cancel the class or figure out how to do it this term. So we're trying. And this week's challenge that I saw was students hooked up their circuit for the first time and it didn't work. And now what? We're at this point in the on-campus course, I and the TAs go in and sit down with each group at their lab bench, and we go through and try to help figure it out. From a distance, what they do is they send an email saying it doesn't work, and then maybe one more sentence, which is completely unilluminating about why it doesn't work. And you can't, there's no response I can give. So we're, I'm setting up Zoom one-on-one meetings and getting the students to point their camera at the thing they built and to share their screen, and trying to do it remotely through Zoom. We actually figured it out with 2 students this last week, which was a small victory. It's always something that the students didn't think about. They wouldn't even think to write down in their email what's wrong because they don't know. And so how do you work through it with them? It's really a personal one-on-one interaction, and then we have to figure out how to do it with Zoom. So,
And I think to bring it home of just the structure, it takes so much patience to work through it all. And that's something that's frustrated me the most, is I am done with my patience at the end of the week.
Yeah.
well, I feel like I have to put a lot more work into figuring out how to explain, how to systematically approach this. Ultimately, it's really learning how to teach things better that weren't really identified in the syllabus, but maybe they should have been. So how to organize things that were unsaid and teach those.
I really, first of all, I hope I didn't offend you with my comment about.
No, I just.
But I think I totally agree with this point about, I was thinking about this yesterday too, just about how the lessons that we're learning now about how to make our teaching more effective and how to overcome all these obstacles are things that we can use in this environment. God forbid if we have to keep doing this, but also that'll just make us better teachers, period. So I think maybe that's one of the takeaways for me, is that it's really made me dig down into what I'm doing and all kinds of ways that I'm teaching. And I hope it'll make me better. We'll see.
Tina, I like what you just said there. I do think this is going to be making us better teachers. And we opened this discussion, I think, a couple of weeks ago with the associate chairs meeting. We should start thinking sometime in the future here of how are we going to make changes. We've learned a lot now, right? How are we going to take what we've learned in positive and start integrating that when we are back in person again? Right.
Well, maybe next week's meeting. I think that's a huge question. There's so many answers to that. But yeah, I think that's of high value.
Well, look, folks, I really appreciate that you came. And I do think that we had a nice conclusion here. I think, Jay, I want to thank you again for sharing, your struggles, but also your conclusion, which is patience. And it is a challenge for all of us to get to the end of the week. And, I love the kind of Bob writing back, well, what's wrong? Like, not just one, it didn't work, but like, all right, let's start with the plug. Is it in? Like, so the level of patience, but in fact, patience is always been a hallmark of what a teacher is, right? I mean, that it brings us back in a very basic level to teaching, and it's exhausting, it's hard work, but it does make a difference. And in as much as it stretches us, we're also students. So on that note, I hope to see you all in 2 weeks. Don't be strangers. Don't be afraid to walk on wood floor. Onwards.
Thank you. See ya.